Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, hello. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Professor Raman. Thank you, Professor Vinod. So, what I'm going to do now, actually, the way we started it was first tea is kind of something we had not researched long ago types, and then we started working on it. Then we realized we went to the field for doing some field work, but then COVID put a halt to that, and then we said, since this field work is not working, let us just focus on what is this industry, how is this economy emerged over time, and let's contextualize uh, what is happening to this sector. And it is in that direction, as a part of the NRPPD project, we started working on it. And what we think are a preliminary understanding of what this tea sector is and whatever will happen over the last almost 160, 180 years with tea economy in India. That is going to be the focus, and the current crisis, which some people call a crisis or current situation, it poses a kind of a conundrum where, unlike the colonial era, where there was one kind of plantation, now we have different kind of people in the value chain, and this is there has been restructuring or reconfiguration of the value chain, and that is going to be the focus. But putting it in a historical perspective of how tea came to India, what all happened to that, and how this reconfiguration has happened recently. So, if we look at tea, again, as I mentioned to you, this is over 180 years of what has happened. Capitalism, like cotton and sugar, are some other commodities which have been the trade of these commodities and production has played a key role in how capitalism and various labor processes nature of the crop, and it's like typically 60 to 100-year crop, and so there is no simple supply response kind of a thing that happens to that. So if there is a huge investment, then yeah, and you cannot get out of it so easily, and this nature would result in speculative manias and booms, and that is somewhat characteristic of this economy, particularly in India. So let me give a very brief background of the um, of how tea reaches India. Like this is, uh, uh, and again, what we want to do also through this presentation is this is also kind of a background paper we want to set for NRPPD. So people who want to research on various aspects could take up many aspects. So in that sense, this is going to be a bit more broad and covering a lot of issues, and some of the deeper analysis could be taken up by PhD scholars and MA students in their thesis. So tea, as far as we know now, that it is grown in China, and around it was first traced as far as back to 3rd century AD, and where tea was initially seen as a medicinal drink, and it is not consumed by everyone, but over time, around 6th century, it is now treated more as a beverage. And by 8th, 9th century, there are books written on tea. And one of the first book on tea is by this person called Lu Yu. And he writes, in regard to drinks, boil water is to quench thirst, wine to drown sorrow, and tea is to avoid sleepiness. So tea is seen as a drink that will bring briskness to everyone. And it is I think supposed to give all kind of benefits. So I think now if you do Google, it cures cancer and other things. Sometimes it causes cancer also in Google. So anyway, so all kind of benefits are attributed to tea since time immemorial. But at those times, tea was basically made in cake form, and it was not processed, and it was made by small growers. Again, the production organization was such that the small growers cultivate tea in their yard, and they just take the leaves and use it for their consumption. Over time, the organization changes where there is certain processing technologies which come up, and then which avoid immediate oxidization of tea leaves. And so in that sense, it is transportable, it becomes transportable and storable substance. And that is when tea starts to become an article of commerce. Till then, it is just something that is consumed only by the household, or they're grown by the household for the household. And as it grows, it again is seen as many other things. Like it is seen as something that could promote intemperance, and there is Buddhist priests who also want to propagate that for this particular reason. Europeans also come across tea slowly, but once they come across it, they are fascinated by it. So, few basic things around the 17th century is when tea becomes popular. This is the first advertisement of tea in 1658 in England, and it is called as cha, and then they say that it has, again, all kind of benefits. Nobody clearly defines what is the benefit of tea, but it grows popular over time. And as an article of commerce, then the involvement of East India Company starts around that time, around 1669, when a very small amount of tea is imported to England. And then over time, this growth of tea as a commodity keeps going up. In the next 50 years, it reaches about 0.5 million pounds. And tea's consumption, tea is seen as some kind of almost a natural breed. And there are various things that happen with EIC. The main contention is that Dutch India Company and East India Company's say competition, but in which EIC manages to get a direct trade with China, and then with the emergence of sugar as a commodity along with tea, starting from 1720, we see a huge jump in their consumption. And tea becomes a very big importable good from China, and almost 40% of whatever imports were going from China was tea. And but this creates a problem. The problem is that China doesn't import much from England, and everything is getting imported from China. So there is a balance of trade crisis, and if at that time still there is wealth of nations was seen as maintaining a balance of trade, and that brings in pressure. And it is in this context that India gets involved in this whole nexus of tea trade. And it doesn't get involved through tea production initially. Initially, it gets involved by the fact that the British start producing opium in India, which the tax and the smuggling of which gives them enough revenues to procure tea. So this is how India gets involved, and the British India-China trade, which involves transfer of consumption goods from Britain to India, then opium from India to China, and then tea from China to Britain, goes reasonably well up to a particular point. And this opium production and trade was quite high up to early 19th century, early 20th century. But despite these volumes, there is a problem that opium trade was not a peaceful thing, and there were opium wars in the 19th century, and there was also anti-opium sentiments in England, and British also wanted to do some production, cultivation of certain crops in India. This is where the notion of improvement comes in, where they want to improve this wastelands and improve the resources which are lying waste. And it is in that context, and in the context of where they are anxious about China's supply of tea, that tea becomes a commodity in India, and tea production is seen as an important thing in India. So tea production comes in front of a kind of a balance of trade crisis and anti-opium sentiments. And in the 1830s, again, Japan had broken all trade with Europe, and this is a topic which I know at some point somebody could added to our detailed, deeper research is where how China and Japan have evaded trade with Europe during that period, and what are the implications of that, and so on. So, but there is this general anxiety that tea supply is going to be a problem to British, and that is where they think, okay, we should be starting to focus on producing tea in India, and that is when they figure out tea production by Singpho community in Assam, and that is where they want to experiment and grow tea in India. And this is the tea committee is appointed by Lord W. Bentinck. He is the one who also abolishes the sati system just before that, and there is this promise of improvement. Again, this notion of improvement follows from many of these things, and tea is also seen as something. By growing tea, we are going to get a lot of money, and a lot of prosperity is going to come to Assam as the initial promise, or Bengal is the initial promise. So the tea experimental setup is experimental station is set up in Sadia, and over this in a period of 6 years, they figure out how to grow tea, and tea is sold in London auctions to start with. So there is some. This is completely investment by the colonial government to get this experimentation done well. So the resources are from the government. And once it is established, now that again the question of production organization keeps popping up again and again. So once they figure out that tea could be produced and sold to London auctions, then how do we organize these productions? So there was these two options they were evaluating. One was either to go with immigrating China growers and let them grow tea, and based on that, Assam tea growers will also start growing tea, or go up with some kind of a monopoly where everything will be taken care by, cultivation will be taken care by some capitalist in India. And it is at this juncture, when they are still dealing with what is the kind of nature of production organization that needs to be done, there is some capitalists from Calcutta and London who asked for transferring the experimental governments for their private tea cultivation. And this is how the Assam company gets formed. So instead of a small grower based cultivation, they move to a plantation. They decide on a plantation based cultivation as a particular thing. And capital is from both from India and England to start with. And Dwaraknath Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore's grandfather, is also one of the investors in this Indian venture. And though over time the Indians get out of this because they don't feel they are being fairly treated, but capital has started coming in. Private capital has come to production of tea. Then, along with capital, the other thing that is required is land, and this is where land was not such a big problem at that time, and particularly the problems were more stranger. So where it was forest land, and there were a lot of issues unique to that land. So one of the letters that comes from the superintendent who is managing the region is that it was with great difficulty that I could procure elephants when I first came here. I could not purchase one at any rate. A herd of elephants having gone off from Jorat in that direction, they followed and 13 of them secured. So getting elephants and using them were the largest challenges. But otherwise the land, in terms of monetary terms, was given at very throwaway rates. So again, it is again the British way of looking at this land as waste as long as something is not cultivated or sold. And so that they said that they come up with the wasteland rules in 1838, where 100 to 10,000 acres of land are given on 45-year-old lease with very few, many years without any rent, and a very small rent in the following years. Even after the lease is over, the land revenue is by rules has to be set lower than that of the rice lands nearby, and cultivation of coffee and opium is prohibited in the region. Having figured out capital and land, the more crucial thing at that time becomes the labor, and it also becomes crucial because Assam had been depopulated at that time, and there was general scarcity of labor. That's how British see it, as scarcity of labor. But more when we dig in, and at least more literature seems to suggest that it was not a typical scarcity. It was scarcity because there was not enough wages given. So the first set of laborers who they try to ask them to start cultivation are from the Darang and Nagaon district, who are called Kachari coolies. So these are the coolies who the Assam company wants to hire, but they do not work because of various reasons. But mostly it is about provision of food on plantations is a problem, and there is this problem of wage discrimination between the laborers in the region and those who are migrated. And there are also opportunities for public works for them, which were paying higher wages. So, and once they do not pay, then they are labeled as lazy coolies, indolent coolies, or who are addicted to opium and things like that. So labor becomes a problem, but it is not a actual problem, but it is a problem created by the fact that you do not want to pay enough wages to the labor. But with this scarcity also, given that there was a smallish kind of a land, they figure out managerial practices in a period of around 12 years. They start earning some profits. Some company starts to make some profits, and after 1852, for 7 years, their profits seem to be doing steadily well. And during this period, this is a period where labor did not have to go through any violence up to that point. Till that point, there were issues related to wage, and the labor were smartly engaging and bargaining for the wages, and some of them they were getting done, some of the things are not done, but there is no violence till that point, at least documented violence till that point. There are also documents which say the planters to avoid violence at any cost. But these things start to change because of, again, tea mania that starts around 1863. And the origins of this again comes from the another set of rules that come, which make these lands even more cheaper. So they say 1854, they modify the 1838 land rules to say that for 99 years, the land will be given on a 99-year lease, and 1/4 of the land is going to be rent-free forever, 3/4 to have rent of 0 annas, 3 annas per acre, and 6 annas per acre for the first 10, 15, and 74 years respectively. These were called fee simple rules. To have a comparison, about that time, peasants were paying a rent of rupees 1 rupee 8 annas to 3 rupees per acre. So, whereas the planter Raj had gets established because of these, where they are having to pay 6 annas per acre for 74 years. It's pretty much like a free land that is being given. But once this is given, there is mayhem. Everybody wants to procure tea land, and they want to grow tea. So they want to become wealthy, and tea seems like something that anybody could grow, and it doesn't have much problem. So these land lease brings in a rush for land and a madness that is compared to southern sea bubble. In only Kachar region, there was applications for 5,57,000 acres of wasteland. To give perspective, as of now, the all over India is only 15,70,000 acres. So in one district, they were getting almost 40% of what were the current existing tea lands. And as some historians note, in those days, existing plantations were brought at 8 and 10 times their value. So those who had plantation, they were able to sell it to others also. Nominal areas of 500 acres were paid for, which on subsequent measurement proved to be under 100. New gardens were commenced on impossible sites and by managers who not only did not know a tea plant from a cabbage, but who were ignorant of the commonest rules of agriculture. Tea planters in those days were a strange medley of retired or cashiered army and navy officers, medical men, engineers, veterinary surgeons, steamer captains, chemists, shopkeepers of all kinds, table keepers, used up policemen, clerks, and goodness knows who besides. So that is a kind of a madness that is prevailing, and everybody buys land which is existing or not existing which boundaries are not clear, but there is a lot of money that has gone into this. And as with any speculative mania, it is supposed to burst at a particular point of time. And within a period of 4 years, it bursts big time. And market value of various share companies fall down in a matter of 4 years by 80%, 71%, and 69%. 25 of the 56 companies which had registered, they wound up their business by 1870. The chaos has a big impact on the economy as a whole. And there are planters who had come here who didn't know what to do, who didn't have any money to go back, and who had to beg their way out of Assam, or who died in the fields itself, in the gardens itself. But more than those planters, the implications for labor and the migrant labor was going to be more harsh, and drastic fallout was going to come for decades to come. So this speculation, when it was happening, the labor scarcity was not at all under any consideration. And to give some perspective, so some 140,000 hectares was bought in Kachar district. So that much, if we have to clean also, they needed 140,000 laborers, which was just above the population of the district, or just above the population of the district. So there was a need to import labor and also have labor working in the plantations, and urgent need to import a lot of labor. And in this scramble, they also forgot that Assam had a food scarcity problem, and it's not just getting the labor in, there had to be food for labor that also had to come in, and otherwise food shortage is going to have big problems. And in 1861, when this all because it's an exceptional circumstance and we want to intervene in the labor market. And they say we need to regulate this labor indenture, and we have to make sure that things are done in a better way. So they come up with a set of laws. I don't go into the details, but in these laws, the basic understanding is there are some protective clauses for the labor, but there is also the labor agreement is now made as a legal contract. The legal contract meaning violation by the laborer is going to be make him or her, more her than him, liable for penalty by the state. And there is a Workmen's Breach of Contract Act, which was there in 1859, which is also transplanted to Assam. Again, this was typically to be implemented only in cities, but now they transplant it to Assam by saying that this is exceptional circumstances, so we have to do this. And such exceptional circumstances keep coming up in a profitability crisis. So again, there are further rules in 1865, and though the contracts say that it's to stipulate a wage of say 5 rupees for men and 4 rupees for women, and a contract for 3-year period, a working day spanning for 9 hours, and a 6-day working week. These are the protective clauses in the law, but then these are never followed. So the daily wage is interpreted first as a wage for a daily task, which is going to be, that becomes the maximum daily wage in that case. So only if you finish all the tasks in the day, you get this 5 rupees. And this is informally interpreted like that. And the protectors are not so vigilant about this. And in terms of garden time, India did not have a standard time till 1906. So the garden time used to be different from the typical time in the railway stations and all, and they had to work as such that they spend most of the time under the sun. So the garden used to fix certain times. So such managerial practices of labor content were also being done during that period. And these conditions again bring in more debt, more desertion, and when also profitability gets down because of another price crisis in 1878, the planters again lobby for another legislation. So this 1882 Special Act, which is the much more problematic act, which gives provision for private arrest to the planter. So if at all the contract is violated, the planter could arrest the coolie and put the coolie in a private plantation arrest. So this is also implemented in 1882, and again there are, like, for namesake, there are some protection clauses, but more than that, the clauses that are violating labor rights play a havoc in laborers' lives. So this is the wages during the 3 decades following the 1882 legislation across various districts. It's stable around that 4-5, and this included not just the wages, but there was this bonus also included, and also the rations imputed. It's despite of all of that, the wages remain almost stable for almost the three decades. And during these 3 decades, the Indian tea production grows tremendously, and Indian tea becomes the major producer and exporter of tea. So this is Indian Tea Association celebrating the fact that in a period of 40 years, where India was a dwarf in comparison to China, is now able to stand high because of the amount of tea that has been produced by the Indian tea industry. There are a lot of laborers who have come in during this period and who have been employed, and overall labor force is around 7 lakhs in 1900. So prices are low, so you produce a lot of quantity with low wages, and that is how they are maintaining the profitability during this period. But this cheap labor has high costs. It is not like they are not able to continue with this because of the internal contradictions, and there are various problems that arise. The first one is related to the fact that the mortality rate is much higher, the death rate is higher compared to birth rate, so they are not able to, the labor doesn't get reproduced in the plantation. The Assam's reputation as labor destination is also low, so migration is not happening. People do not want to migrate from Chotanagpur to Assam as they wanted to before. And both of these means that the hiring costs are going up, even though the wage costs are lower. So in some sense, the cheap labor and all of these are becoming costlier to the planters. And this violation is also vocally criticized by few members of British bureaucracy and Christian missionary. So one commissioner called Cotton writes a report in 1993, which has a big impact. He's dismissed, but then which has a big impact on changing these legislations. And the laborers also had their forms of protest and resistance, which played a big role after initially few legislations were taken out in 1901 and 1908. And these protests have all paved the way for end of indenture, but it doesn't happen before 1926. And 1920-21, 20 to 22 is when there is a series of strikes and riots in districts of Assam, and indentured system finally ended with withdrawal of Act 12 of 1859 in the year 1926. After a period of steady growth, and again the tea industry once again comes up with crisis, it faces a crisis, and that is not tea industry. The Great Depression has some implications on the growth of the tea industry. And this is when an international tea agreement is signed. Now profitability is maintained not by wage suppression, but by reducing the production, and reducing the production by, say, around 15%, and all different countries agree to reduce the production by 15%. And this seems to have impact on prices. At least prices seem to be going up post this 1933 agreement. And in a particular period of the depression, to get such high prices was considered something great for any industry, and tea was lucky in that regard, that particularly the Assam companies were following the production restrictions, whereas the South Indian companies did not, and that has implications on the current growth of small tea growers. I'll link both of that at some point of time. And that is not, they do not end with that. Once you reduce production, it is going to have impact on the wage incomes of the laborers. It's like it is going to, one is direct wage cuts were also there, but also if less is being produced, less wage are what the gardeners are going to get. And again, this brings in another round of struggles in the Assam gardens and around, and this over a period of time also leads to formation of trade unions, which play a big role in coming up with Labor Inquiry Commission in 1944, which paves way of among the most important legislations in the tea industry, the Plantation Labor Act. So this is the background under which Plantation Labor Act comes into India. I have not covered the South Indian tea plantation, but the things about land given almost for free, the legislations imposed are all very similar to North India, but it is relatively less repressive, in no means good, but in relatively less repressive than North India. That is what the literature seems to suggest. So this is the context in which tea that is coming to India and how colonial India has produced tea and maintained profitability. And post-independence, there are few changes. Again, some of it linked to the Great Depression. The first big change that happens over time in independent India is the surge in domestic consumption. To look at it in bit in detail, so initially the British never were concerned about bringing tea consumption to India, but except very small at 1 to 19, they some called as spice packets, and they used to sell it. They used to give it free for certain. So whatever is not sold in auctions, part of it would be packed, and then given free to people around. But then, so the typical advertisements at that time would be about Indians producing tea for the English Babu. That is, or Angrez. So that is the kind of targeting that was done to start with. There was not much that was changing for a while. Only when the Great Depression comes, then they figure out that there is a lot of tea stock lying here. Why not sell it to Indians, or as they call it, 350 million thirsty throats only awaiting initiation? So that is the time where, again, domestic consumption is seen as an important thing, and they set up Indian Tea Market Expansion Board, and where they have a campaign that includes tea vans, free tea, paise packets, signages, and demonstrations. And there are accounts of how they managed to show demonstrations in Parda wielding households and all. They document things very well. So there is a big campaign to make tea a common drink, and from imperial drink, it had to be made as a desi chai. That is, and there is again resistance from the nationalists on how you could drink tea, which is sucking the bloods of Assam laborers. And so there is also this thing of it being given a Swadeshi flavor to tea in about 1940s. Then tea is positioned as a drink that, again, like we saw with China, it's something that gives alertness. Tea breaks are encouraged in companies and all that, but still, even as late as 1947, I think only 70% of tea was produced for exports, which would mean most of our generation's grandfathers might not have had drank tea. Might have engaged with tea, but not drank tea. And all across India, there is this campaign that tea is good, tea is alert, tea makes housewives better to work, tea makes people to work better in industry, afternoon tea breaks are important, and so on. Seminars you won't sleep and things like that. Yeah, so then, but then the tea collusion thing works well. So then there is this, so no more of this domestic market is now not needed. So then the focus is now back to international markets. So for another 30 years, so this was 1930s, 40s, but even though the campaign began, then the campaign is again left in lurch because there is money is coming from the export market. So why do I have to worry about the domestic market? But the one technological innovation brings a big change to everything. That is called the curl tier curl technique, which is another way of producing tea. So this is a crushed ear curl. Huh? So this is a technique that was invented by a Scotsman for producing tea. And unlike the orthodox tea, this is a much simpler machine which can be installed and which tea leaves can be put in, and you get much smaller tea. The tea we most of the times we drink is CTC tea. And once this comes in, the production costs come down, the prices also come down, and tea's domestic consumption starts going up because of these. So domestic consumption starts growing from 1960s. You see a good average year-on-year growth over the last 6 decades is quite high, somewhat higher in the last decade. And so this is happening, and also the other thing that is happening is in the export, there is competitors coming from Sri Lanka and Kenya who are doing much better than Indian tea, and because of that, India's market is coming down, and more it has become now a domestic tea. Like so, as of I think 2020, around 89-90% of the tea is sold for the domestic market. That is where only 9% is sent to the export market. Another change that happens is also the way the production is done. So as of now, the consumption market has changed. The production is also done by different players now. So how much time? 10 minutes or 10 minutes. Right. So yeah, okay, fine. So yeah, this should be, so the SDGs. So the other thing that emerges is, apart from consumption, that there is this emergence of production in a different way. This production is now done by small tea growers. Again, the genesis of small tea growers again is in the time of depression, where this Great Depression, where there was collusion and each firms were given export quotas. So the firms had the plantations could not grow enough tea. So then they had they started buying leaves from the small tea growers. Smaller farmers in their land started growing tea and tea leaves were given to the plantation companies. But over time, this also emerged as a different. This is where reconfiguration of value chain happens, where factories start coming up who say, okay, this processing, why do you sell your leaves to the plantation? We are, as a factory, we will take your leaves and we'll process it and make tea. I'm just putting it that way. We don't know which came first, the factory came first or the tea grower came first. But both of them start emerging around 1960s. And this CTC tea is very much liked by people in USSR, and a lot of export is done now to the USSR. So if you look at composition, UK of different countries that are tea is exported, UK comes down drastically, and then USSR becomes a significant tea importing country, and the SDG growth is like mostly to cater to that demand. But and again, these are USSR's emergence is like they over 3-4 year period, it becomes the highest exporter, and there is lot of tea exported to USSR. And as of now, we have 50% of total tea, around 51% of total tea is produced by these small tea growers. From there, when it started, now basically the small tea growers produce more tea than the plantations. So that is the big change that has happened. And what it has done also is that now around 11 states, previously it was about 4 states which were growing tea. Now 11 states and about 66 districts in those states are growing tea, because farmers have started growing tea. But there is something else that happens now. So now the value chain looks something like this. So unlike previous times where, say, plantation to branding, everything was largely concentrated. Now we have plantations and the plantation system with plantation factories and smallholders who sell leaves to plantation factories and bottle factories. The major sale is to bottle factories, but some of the smallholders also sell it to the plantations. And from there, it goes to the leaves, the tea that is made goes to auction called the made tea, first level of tea, goes to the auction centers. And from the auction center, it is bought by various agents, and then blending and packaging and branding is done. And that is where we get our cup of tea. So this is the broad value chain. There are other players like cooperative factories, which we have not indicated here, which are basically factories which manufacture processed tea from the leaves by their small grower members. So, but over the last decade, the puzzle or the value chain conundrum that we want to indicate, we want to highlight is that the recent conundrum is that, so the previous value chain has changed, it has reconfigured, but after this reconfiguration, what has happened, not because of the reconfiguration, and after the USSR's decline, the retail prices seem to be going up reasonably at some rate, but the auction prices have remained stagnant. These are just current prices. So auction prices in 8 of the auction centers have remained stagnant. Retail prices seem to be going reasonably better. Only during COVID is the time when auction prices went up, but then subsequent to that, the retail prices went up at a much higher rate. So this is the puzzle we want to focus on, and this is and given what we know about this sector, we want to see at what is the implication of this to various different players in the value chain. So one thing is that if we consider companies which are in all these nodes, that is cultivation of leaf, processing of leaf, blending, marketing, distribution, sale, then if a company is into all of these, they don't face any problem. Because even if they are going to lose out on the made tea, because the retail tea they're getting higher prices, they're able to get reasonable profits. The crisis then seems to be affecting people who are in two nodes of the value chain. Like one of them, the plantation sector, which are not vertically integrated, who are just into cultivation and processing of leaf. And there is the small tea grower who is into just cultivation of leaf. So what I want to focus now is to look at these two actors and how they have engaged with this value chain conundrum. Plantations have been, as we saw, all of these incentives have been received by the plantation sector. And despite Kerala being a state that is supposed to have gone through radical reforms, land reforms, tea plantations were exempted from land ceilings. Again, the efficiency argument was given that there are the economies of scale might work better for tea plantations. But even with all those subsidies, they had not invested in replanting of bushes and even in times of good profitability. But this crisis has come in as a big problem to them. And in this crisis, during this crisis, if you look over these last 40, 50 years, if we see, the yield of large plantation growers have also been much lesser compared to small tea growers. That small tea growers with only 33% of land are producing 51% of tea indicates the laggardness of plantation sector in comparison to a dynamic STG sector. And this has happened largely because of lack of investment by the plantation managers and plantation companies. And once this crisis has come, they have responded largely by either abandoning the plantation or diversifying into things like tea tourism. They have used this narrative of crisis to reduce their wage and welfare commitments to the labor. So this abandoning and withdrawal of welfare again has only transferred the crisis and the problems to the laborers. And the struggle has been largely faced by the laborers, and the problems have come out in open over the last 15 years with things like strikes, with things like starvation deaths across North and South India. So what this seems to suggest is that both in efficiency and equity reasons, this crisis seems to indicate a need for restructuring the plantation sector. The efficiency arguments are still not working. Maybe in a time of labor scarcity, it was probably one way out. But it is at this stage, when there is indication that we could integrate product, we can separate production and processing. There is no need to have these plantations. And in this particular way, also, if at all innovations could be made, there could be the land, could it be now given to at least lease to other people, or a land bank kind of a thing uh, that can be done to sell off the plantation land or lease off the plantation land to use by other laborers or for other purposes, something we have to seriously think. And this is also the history part, probably tells us that they have been largely getting all kind of benefits from the government, and within that they have grown as a sector. And if they are not able to exhibit any efficiency or equity, it is time we need to restructure them. The other sector, STG, has been facing stagnant leaf prices, and the whole thing has been that they do not have quality leaves. But if at all they do not produce quality leaves, the tea produced by bottle factories and the auction price should have shown some divergence. Our preliminary analysis, at least, seems to suggest there is nothing of that sort that is happening. So there might be heterogeneity in quality of leaves that is produced by small tea growers, but there is no indication that this quality is much lower than tea produced by plantation sector. So these STGs have also faced this. They are also facing a crisis, or supposed a potential crisis. And how have they dealt with it? Some of them have exited when the leaf prices fell down from 12 to 6. The currency bush, as they called it, did not lead to continued prosperity forever. But they have also responded, particularly the Badagas in Nilgiris. At least there is documented evidence that they have been protesting for fairer prices, and they seem to have got something called the price sharing formula. This price sharing formula seems to have been at least giving them ways to sustain their production given the current situation. So SPGs seem to be working with the price sharing formula, where whatever is the price of made tea, a proportion has to be given to the tea leaves. That is the formula, and despite problematic implementation, this has done something for the SPGs. So even the NSSO analysis seems to suggest that the SPGs have have got their incomes down. Incomes have gone down. There is no denial of that, but still, by higher yield, they have been able to manage somewhat better. Like say, from 57,000 per acre, they have been able to get 88,000 per acre. But this was largely, the prices had come down from 19 to 16 rupees, but the improved yield seemed to have saved them from a larger problem. So conclusions, what we want to say is that it's over a long period of history, the plantation sector has grappled with downturns by various ways. One of the ways was the legislation way, which was used to suppress wage income, and the other was cartelization. But at this stage, in this new crisis, now they are not the only players. There are people who have got vertically integrated who do not seem to have much of a crisis. But the plantation sector, the way they have diversified or abandoned cropping, and the way they have withdrawn from their welfare implications, means that there is probably urgent need to restructure the plantation economy. Also considering the labor in the sector, it's not restructuring, should also, for instance, now there is some 15% land given of the tea land could be given for tourism. With such a decision, what is the impact it is going to have on plantation labor should be considered before whenever such a restructuring is done. SPGs seem to have shown promise on efficiency. The political struggle for fairer price and improved yields seem to have helped them sustain through this crisis. Not that they're doing really well, but at least the price sharing formula seems to have done something good for them. So this is the broad observations we had for the sector, and this is what I wanted to present.
So, how do we proceed? We have to ask questions first and my observations. Thank you. Can they hear?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think now we have, I think several results, to compare like Thiagu. I mean, that gets already taken up challenging. That's actually it's a very it's not very specific to certain issues. Secondly, he also admitted that look, I mean, he says more about the northeast and not much about south. So, in that sense, it is self-legitimizing. Make your point quite clear that, look, I'm more focused on this and not much about this. So that way, I would say that it is a very good presentation. So many things you are saying. And also, I would say that there are a whole lot of issues emerging out of that, maybe because of this broadness. So, at one level, you need to make some comments because, you yourself admit that it is very specific to that. But, you have a long history explaining what's happening with respect to Assam and all these plantations. But, when you come to your American part, you focus more on South India. So there is a mismatch between these two. This American fact you explain in terms of this STGs. And then it is all about, the bottling factories and that sort of things with respect to South India. So some sort of a mismatch when you write a paper or when you bring out your working paper, it's better not to have that sort of a mismatch. So either you focus on Northeast or Assam or like that and say more about the contemporary American facts. Otherwise, say that look, it doesn't go to unless and until you take care of the historical part of something as well, which is not. So either you be more specific about that. That's one point. Second point is that look, I mean, it's fantastic that you have taken up this long period. So it is always better to give the reader a bit of an idea about the larger theoretical issues emerging as part of this value chain analysis. It's not that simple. Because you need to explain yourself which exactly is the tradition that you really want to follow. Because there are several traditions. You take it as a major set theme. Whether you want to focus on this production-based sort of analysis, that is, you continue to generate values and you identify certain nodes which will generate more values to the manufacturer or to the producer or to the capital, depriving certain benefits to the workers, the actual producers of that surplus. I'm not using any Marxist. I don't want to explain it further because you may say that this is a very different sort of political economy that I explain. No, it's not like that. Just talk in terms of plain economics. So if you want to focus on that, you just explain that what way each node is generating what is called the profit and how this profit is distributed along the value chain across nodes in node 1, node 2, node 3, like that. You can identify these nodes. It is very much there in your presentation, but it is not made explicit. It's not made explicit. You can straight away go for a very critical analysis. Look, I mean, for cultivation costs, you might have cost A, B, C, like that. You will have a figure, and then you move on to next node. And there, you have a very different set of agencies involved. Because as you said, you have cheap labor, cheap within quotes, because at a later stage, because of labor legislation and like that, it might have become a bit more costly for the planters. So, in that particular node, what exactly is taking place? In what way it is being constituted? That particular node is constituted and reconstituted. And you move on to another node and then say, look, how it is being constituted and reconstituted. So you need to be very clear in your introduction. what exactly you really wanted to say. Of course, I mean, as a broad sort of a canvas, it is fine. That's why I gave you the second set of congratulations. But that's not enough for me. That's why. So, thirdly, I mean, it is quite clear from your presentation, but you're not coming to that point. It's true that you have these 2 or 3 or 4 sets of agents involved in each and every node. You know, what is called those who operate the logistics or the actual producers, manufacturers, and the auctioneers. And you need to know what sort of consideration is there at that particular point. Because you are saying that the crisis narrative. That's interesting. But you need to remember that there are different kinds of crisis narrative. So many crisis narratives are there. If you ask the planter, producer, or the Association of Planters Association, they will have one version of crisis narrative, which is completely different from the crisis narrative that you get from the workers. Or that again is going to be different when you go and meet the plantation women workers. So what I'm trying to say is that when you say crisis narratives, please be specific about it, or say that at least in footnote you mentioned that this is how it is being understood and like that. You have multiple narratives, but look, I focus on this particular aspect and like that. The fourth one, I think, yeah, that's the thing. Again, that's a concern. That's a concern. You have crisis, and you mentioned that when there is crisis, it is. I don't know whether you use the word because in my book I have used it several times. That may be the reason why I'm tempted to say a bit about that. I mean, you have the crisis, but what they do normally as a producer or a planter, they just wanted to transfer that crisis to the other agents. And in this case, you have the workers. That's why that you find that the long wage stagnation in your case is 30 years, 3 decades. And in my case, something like case, it is 15 years. And after that, there was a surge in wages. So what I'm trying to say is that be specific about it. Okay, you transfer this. But at the same time, when you make more profits, you're reluctantly transferring this. So, you bring in some sort of dynamics in your analysis. That's very important. I'm not saying that Thiagu should take it up, but other students have taken along those lines. Because this national research, it's a very mega sort of a you are going to have a series of obligations, I think. So, other students can seriously think about it. In what way that these narratives emerge? What exactly is the politics of these narratives? You don't know the politics of these narratives. It's so complex. You know what the APK is saying in Kerala? In your presentation, it's very much there. They continue to demand that it's a big loss for us. So you do one thing. You just what is called violate or dilute the land reforms that we have passed from that. Why? Because we want our land back. We wanted to use this land for some other purposes. So it is how this narrative crisis is being communicated to the state. And if the state really wanted to help the planters instead of the workers or other communities, they would obviously go for that. They would say that, okay, we are ready to dilute the land reforms and we are ready to allow you to use this land for some other purposes. You can use this land for tourism. I mentioned in your presentation. So what I'm trying to say is that this tension, the underlying tension, if you don't unravel, then as policymakers, we are not going to get much. I mean, we need to, in our meeting, in the planning board or some other places, we need to say that, look, I mean, we have a study, CTS, saying that, look, this is the kind of implications that we have if we go for this or that. I'm not saying that it should be policy oriented. Never, I don't want to say that. I'm not saying that. But since you have analyzed this twice possible, which of course is contemporary in nature, we want to know more about it. In terms of you want to support the planters or the workers or the women workers or the what is called the auctioneers. And there also you need to say what exactly, if you look at again Job's article, you will find that the buying concentration in the auction centers, it is that buying concentration that Yeah, yeah. So that's the thing that you need to work on. That's the thing that I'm not saying that Thiagu alone should take it up as a challenge. Other students can take it up as a major theme of work. So that's the thing. And I come back to this. And apart from that, one critical point that I thought of saying only now. The thing is that, this it is called for us, it's historical time. We call it as historical time by following the writings of what is called Brother. You know, Brother says that, look, I mean, you need to decompose the long historical time into temporalities. And it is how that you understand the past. Otherwise, you will have traditional histories. You will be able to capture the micro histories. I mean, you might say that, oh, I'm doing this micro history, what should I be bothered about the long geographic time like that? No, that's false. You need to, because this place is favorably or unfavorably incorporated externally. It's not just living in isolation. It has been incorporated externally, either favorably or unfavorably. And this place is being shaped and reshaped. David Harvey's classic work, you just go through that. You'll find that how a particular region is being shaped and reshaped and like that. Of course, I'm not asking you to go for Palestine or Untitled France and like that. I mean, that's a political economy sort of work, which is not there in your presentation. And I don't want to blame because this is a very different set of questions that you raise, and those questions are very valid. So, what I'm trying to say is that if you take this long historical period, then you need to say a bit about disjunctures. That's very important, the discontinuities. There is one discontinuity that you have identified well and you have explained it. I agree with you. When you talk about the growth of SDGs, that's specifically a disjuncture as far as the long value chain is concerned. That's not the only one disjuncture that has happened. It has reshaped the entire value chain. There were so many disjunctures like that. So we need to identify which are those disjunctures which reshape the pre-existing value chain and what exactly are the implications. So for instance, for instance, the Regulation Act, we now implement, say, that just changed the ownership pattern. And that was the beginning of the so-called sort of fragmentation of large estates and like that, because the foreign exchange was diluted, foreign ownership was diluted. So, and there is also the threat of new forms of land reforms. So the best way for you is to fragment your estates, big plantations, make it small. You make it small. So, so these several distances you need to identify. And for instance, the Asian trade, ASEAN, in what way? At least in report you need to mention, at least in footnote. Then only it becomes comprehensive. Otherwise, it's easily questionable. So these discontinuities or disjunctures or new interventions from external agencies, these are all things which continue to interact. It is so interdigitated. It's a very different process. So interdigitated in such a way that this local economy is shaped and reshaped, and the local social forces are also being shaped and reshaped in the context. So what I would like to say is that there is so much scope, and thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. And let us request our participants.
So, next presentation, explain the different many aspects. I am interested in the export part. We can see that India is having comparative advantage in production. Second largest in terms of, but while coming to export, Kenya and Sri Lanka, then and China, they are leading the export market, and India is on the third position. So, why it is happening? Is it because of the quality of tea we are producing? Because of that, we are not qualifying for the export market, or the demand for the Indian tea is less. And related to that, does less export lead to less profitability and low
innovation activity in tea production? And is there a circle like explaining low export, low profitability, low technological advancement in the tea production, that can grow profitability and good quality of tea? Yeah, that is the thing. Smoothie.
Yeah, please.
My question is,
Your name is?
Shraddha. So my question is about the collective bargaining that you mentioned that the Foundation Labor Act. So at one point generally the thing that these acts come in, there is a scope for labor bargaining and the unions gain voice. And how do you link that with the emergence of small tea growers subsequently, or I not understand whether these were going parallelly in these developments or one preceded another? How is and did the collective bargaining change when there are small tea growers or vis-a-vis the plantation?
Thank you for a nice presentation. And I have observed two observations of your presentations. I want to see your presentation from the farmers' point of view. And if you see the price process, it is found that recently there is an increase in the retail prices. However, there is a constant in the auction prices. There is a possibility that the farmers are getting less. Tea grower, they are getting less prices. It may be possible that they are getting because they have less bargaining power. This may be the possible reason. And here, if the farmers taking the farmer size is reducing and the farmer size is reducing, there is a negative impact on the profitability of their production. At the same time, your result also found that there is a finance it's similar with the inverse farm size theory. That whenever the farm size is reducing, there is the productivity of the farmers. Productivity of the growers is increasing. Here, there is a trade-off between efficiency and profitability. And how you do it?
Yeah, so we like that. Is that okay? Yeah, we have some questions online. So
I just want to highlight now the current crisis of the Sri Lankan crisis. That is, yeah.
yeah, that we first can start with collective bargaining and SDGs. Yeah, trade unions have played a big role in getting not just the plantation labor act, but also implementing it. Implementing it well. So as long as whenever the trade unions have been good and they have been very in terms of considering the interests of labor, but that is not the case all across and across time. There have been complaints about how trade unions are not representative enough, particularly the women laborers who form the major working population, but trade union composition is not the same. And even with the Dalits, it is not the same. And, there is also recent some strikes which have got more attention because of so trade unions not working. They seem to be there is some kind of but yeah, there is a lot of questions regarding the efficiency that bargaining problem has impacted issues on PL. The other thing, STG, what is happening is that STGs now, because they can produce at a much cheaper price, they can sell leaves to the plantations. So now, because the leaves come from STGs, 20% of estate leaves comes from plantation, from the multi. Now, this undermines the agency of the labor in the plantation. So, this linkage between SDG and plantation, the recent thing is this. So, where SDGs do well, so I can procure things from there. So, the labor I can make it contractual labor, or I can downsize and all that. So, the linkage between SDG and this is a kind of a problem. Like if you engage more and encourage SDGs, but this is also affecting labor agency within the sector. That is what is happening. They are parallel, actually parallel, but they are also integrated in a particular way to work through the labor control. That is what is the current things that are happening. Some documentation is there, but not much. Is there. So the export thing about quality is taken. So there are different types of tea. So one is this CPC, as I mentioned, is the major tea produced in South India and 90% of India actually. So this was actually innovation in some sense. And I don't know what is the, I would say innovation. Innovative thing in the sense they were able to produce low cost tea, which was able to cater consumption and export at low price. So Russia was, there were a lot of questions like CTCT, that's when USSR, that is when it became the export boom also happened with this particular thing. Now the export composition has changed, where there are more green leaf, the orthodox tea are seen as important teas or more export oriented teas. This is where China is the major producer. And orthodox tea is more Kenya, it's more into that. So we can't say we are all like equal competitors. We are in kind of somewhat different markets also, I would say. So the quality of the tea is a overestimated thing. It's the variety that matters. The quality, there is some concerns, but it is what kind of tea is produced and what kind of tea six four is. Yeah. So we have been like so it's not the innovation problem, but quality is again the so but it's the type of the tea that is different. So you can venture again.
Yeah, Minu. I'll come. I forgot coming in. What happened? Eh?
Is likely to help us. That is what the sense of it, but it is also the same thing because you can be different market. There is Sri Lanka, but the proportion of CPCT. So it depends on that. Whether they were exported CPCT, then we are likely to benefit. Yeah, that can be replaced by that. Yeah.
Hello, Ashok sir, you can please ask her. Hello. Or next is Ajit sir, you can ask now.
Good evening, Dr. Viraman, and good evening, Dr. Thiagu. I am Ajit Balakrishnan from Association of Planters of Kerala. Sir, actually, your presentation, thank you very much for a detailed presentation. And I have a view that actually your presentation more or less was concentrating towards Northeast plantations rather than, focusing towards South India, especially Kerala. My first question is actually you are talking about the price puzzle, and you were talking about the completely vertically integrated plantations were better off. But have you done any detailed study that is the structural informatives happening? Because as per Tea Board's tea marketing control order, even vertically integrated plantations are supposed to give 50% of their production into auction. So even if they do the vertical integration packing, they can do the balance 50%. That is, the first 50% what they produce goes as commodity prices at the auction. Second point I just want to talk about is you are talking about replanting of bushes. You are mentioning it's true that Kerala's bush age is above 80 years. The economic yield of tea bush is between 60 to 65 years. It is over that. But have you done any studies why even in a profitable year, they were not able to make reinvest in plantations, because agriculture income tax was as high as 60% of profit in Kerala till late 90s. Then it came down to 50%, and in till 2010, actually 2012, it was 50%. Then it came down to 30%. So even if you make profit, you don't have the profit in your hand. It is actually supposed to go back to government as agriculture income tax. Then coming to your point on diversification, actually, if you look at it, no planter is actually, and during the discussions, and Dr. Ravi Raman was mentioning of different verticals like labor, then society, then government, different stakeholders, auctioneers, planters, etc. Actually, what we should look at the detailed studies should have been, it is actually one ecosystem wherein the small tea growers as well as the large plantations, everybody together, what is the issue there actually they are facing? Have we really looked into that? Even workers' case also, if you look at it, the collective bargaining part we were talking about. I would like to request Dr. Thiagu if he can attend the plantation labor committee meetings in Kerala. If there's actually wage negotiations will be happening very soon. So if you attend that, the strength of collective negotiations happening, collective bargaining happening as in the trade union part. I am not talking about the small tea grower part. The trade union part, what is happening? Because Kerala has evolved. Kerala's trade unions has evolved over the years. Because it is the first industrial relations committee was formed in Kerala, 1951, on plantations. And the evolution of that collective bargaining has helped to evolve a well ecosystem for collective bargaining. And for your information, Kerala pays the highest wages in India among plantation sector. And the last point I want to bring your attention to is that is actually price spread. When we are talking about how much a grower is earning, actually we talk about green leaf as well as made tea. How much a grower is earning and how much the retail prices, where the price spread is going. It is actually, that is where the problem in Kerala plantations are concerned. The real grower is not getting the prices. Actually, after auction, the price spread part percentage, if you take, please study that. So that will give a better picture what is happening in plantations. And the last point, I just want to finish it off. Dr. Ravi Raman was mentioning a point of transfer the crisis to workers. We never have that intention of transferring the crisis to workers. What we always say is, actually, without workers, plantations will not be able to survive. What we want is actually, along with the workers, we need some systemic changes, because we can't keep on saying that we are making losses because our land productivity is low, our worker productivity is low, our price is bad. We can't say that. So that the study also, if you can focus, what exactly is required for the policy changes. Not that plantations, diversify into tourism. It's not practically possible. Everybody will be going into tourism. It's not going to help us. What we are saying is, keeping the basic infrastructure of plantations, what changes we can bring in. That is what we are asking for. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you so much. You can also think, you can just respect.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the first thing about whether there has been detailed study on the price spread and why that 50% are being sold to what are the data we were able to get. Again, that is what we have worked with. As of now, we didn't get into any further. We spoke to people and tried to get as much data as possible. That what we understand is the auction prices. One innovation or one thing that is not done in other cases is that we looked at whether the bottling factory prices and the auction prices, which includes bottling factory and plantation tea, whether there has been any difference. At least for over the last 7 years, there doesn't seem to be. So this is where the thing about quality of leaf by small tea growers being brought up to the mark is questionable, is what we said. So at least the prices don't indicate anything of that regard. That is the only extra thing we've been able to do, but not on The thing is, we are telling that the auction prices have also been. We are not saying that there is a problem with auction price also both for the bottle factory and for the estates. There is no, it's not that estates are getting in general like this. Some of the estates might be going on. The replanting, we have only come across keyboard again and again at various points of time saying that there is a target of this much percent, 2% at times where we want replanting, but that is not happening. There has been no detailed study. What you are saying is a good input for us. We have to look at if taxes, the actual replanting was lower in regions where they were higher taxes. That is not done yet. About the wage labor thing, what we understand is that there is also this thing about how many consumption units are considered in the minimum wage calculations. I think there is some issues in that particular bargaining which has not worked out well. Like, so now we consider 1.5 units as the units for setting the minimum wage.
See, basically, it is actually what the minimum wage calculation goes back to say that it is actually 4 units, 4 consumption units. That is what for plantations, but that is way back. But current negotiation, collective negotiation is not coming into that into picture. That is actually now the negotiation has totally changed into, the quantum of increase. That is where there's no proper study on consumption unit, and the expenditure study is not happening over the last. I've been in plantation labor committee for the last 12 years, so it's not happening.
Yeah, that they can understand. Yeah, the understanding is that if you do not get the units right, the bargaining for the levels of the growth doesn't get you so long.
Your voice is breaking. You are not audible.
As long as you do not get the units revision done, the incremental wage revision may not match the actual requirements of the labor. And it is in that regard that the number of units considered is still even in Kerala. I do not think has been up for revision. And that's why T, as from whatever brief evidence we have, seems to have the lowest organized sector wages across all states in which it is grown. That has not changed even in Kerala. So that is that bargaining has not been done by trade unions is what we understand. That is incremental gains. The larger thing about how many consumption units will change the nature of bargaining. In terms of diversification, what we are saying is any diversification or any restructuring should consider the labor at least. That's all we are saying. We are not saying exactly what needs to be done. One possibility is could the land be given on lease to the laborers? That is some proposition that is coming there. And maybe can we incentivize that land to grow something else? If there is excess supply is the problem. That can people who take lease and give an incentive for growing some other crop. The government is giving paddy cultivation in other places. Paddy cultivation by incentivizing maybe 2,000 rupees. Can something like that be done? The landowner also gets some revenue, but it is given in lease. That is one thing which seems to be seriously presented by many people. I'm just telling that.
We'll discuss directly in person also. I'll come down and meet you.
Yeah. On that, it was about the price spread, retail and yeah. So that's what the price is a problem, but because you are able to get more yield over time, so the small grower is able to manage profit. But the larger plantations, their yield is coming down. So with price coming down, they are facing a lot. Recently, so.
As a person is plantation estates, they are relatively older. So less product.
Yeah, you can answer.
Hello, can I? Am I audible? I have a quick question to Dr. Ranganathan. I'm Rinju Rasaili. I teach at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Can you please give some insight into the concept you used of land bank as an institution? Is something which is little is quite new, and perhaps it will help us to understand this idea. And also, Dr. Sorry, I joined in a little late. Maybe a little bit if you could touch on your methodology that you've used for your work. And I'm not able to hear you clearly, so if you could just pull your mic a little closer. It's not. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I'll answer the second one first. So we at this thing, we were basically thinking about it as more of a background paper for the NRPPD tea research that we will conduct. So in that sense, I'm not focused on any specific technology, but give a broad overview of larger issues that is facing the tea sector and some research questions in this paper. And the land bank is where land bank as a concept, as I understand, is that the land bank gets the land, purchases the land from the planters, and then later say sells it on installment kind of a thing to other growers. So where growers can, in their share of revenues, they can pay for the land in installments. So that is the broad idea. It has been tried in.
Is this practiced in Assam?
Just say, like, given that the plantations need restructuring, is this a possibility? Is what I was.
I see. Thank you.
This has been suggested in several other courses. It's not something which is confined to mandates. We're just trying to.
Okay, thank you.
And make use of. So that's quite common. I mean, that idea has become so. It's being implemented.
Employment and other things, workers are defining it. There is a definition. I don't know. It's still you are saying, are there any definition that
they are farmers who are cultivating tea in there.
Are they involving any cross? They call that
cultivators. I mean, that case, it will be cultivators. I think the answer is definition is that they have to have land but less than 8 hectares. If they have less than 8 hectares and they are cultivating tea, they are called small tea growers.
is there any like to mention Madras, some Madras,
This in Nilgiris, the caste Vadakas, they are the ones who grow tea more. So they were the group of people there and whose land initially was displaced for tea cultivation by plantations, and now they have got some land on which they are cultivating tea much more efficiently than plantation. In some sense, that is a very interesting flow.
They also do have their own cooperatives.
The community, they are actually not the backward classes, but they are claiming scheduled tribe status recently. So they are still, there is a party also, and they were instrumental in initiating this strikes and price stabilization by sharing for in the Nilgiris.
So, is that okay? I think it's fantastic and we are
served outside, I think, university. And it's on a